Now let's move into the arena of security in SQL Server 2005. Now there are some things that you need to understand when you think about securing SQL Server 2005. There have been some pretty hefty enhancements to this version of SQL Server, and so I want to step through those with you briefly here. Now this is going to be an overview, and you will need to dig a little deeper, but I'm going to show you some very simple examples and help you get your head around what's happened to security in SQL Server. First of all, let me just give you a little laundry list here of things that they've added this year. First of all, we now have password policies for our SQL Server logins. Now, this is in association with Active Directory. It gives the capability to apply password policies for SQL Server logins just like you have them in Active Directory. So you can now deal with the complexity of the password and how often it's been changed and all that sort of thing. So you can now add that kind of functionality, which is fabulous because users are notorious for reusing passwords hundreds of times, using too easy of a password. So that'll take care of that. The next thing they've added, and this is probably the biggest thing, is a hierarchical security scope, and I'll explain that a little more later, but suffice it to say right now that this means that we don't have to apply security on individual user or group basis anymore. We can actually apply it at a database level or a server level and so forth. You'll like this. This is one that's kind of tough to get your head around, is the separation of user and schema, and I'll show you some examples later. If you were around in SQL 2000, you remember the database owner was a major portion of all the objects, and the database owner had a lot to do with security. In this version of SQL, the database owner has now been separated, for most parts, from the actual security itself. It's now based on schema. We create objects in the context of a schema, and we can apply permissions to that schema. I'll show you some examples a little later. And then, this is really cool, a declarative execution context. And I'll show you this. We can determine exactly who can execute, for example, our stored procedures. As we write this stored procedures, we can declare that in our code. So Microsoft really went to the drawing board and really put their heads to the task of security here. And I'm not giving you all of it here. There's more things that we don't have time to cover, and they'll get too complex. And then, of course, the last one is certificates. You can now use certificates out of Transact SQL to provide either authentication or encryption for your SQL Server data, and I'll give you a quick example of that as well. So as you can see, they've done a lot to SQL Server, and we'll cover most of these things here. But the big thing is that there have been so many fundamental changes to SQL Server security that it's not like you've been thrown off the train. If you were here in 2000, it's not like you're totally lost now, but they've enhanced it. So you need to get your head around it before you jump headlong into SQL Server 2005, and that's exactly what we're going to do in these next few videos.